Whether intentional or not, allegations of mass voter suppression taking place just before the election continues for LNG site workers post-election. The tradesmen raising red flags are not LNG staff, but rather serving underneath JGC Floor JV, the prime contractor of the LNG Canada project site in Kitimat, British Columbia. I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News, and in my first report probing into such concerns, which you can find at our special website called campaign2025.com, I brought you an interview with a whistleblower from the site who, like several others I spoke with, alleged that hundreds, if not thousands, of non-local tradesmen were led to believe they would be able to be transported to vote on voting day, only to find out after it was too late to vote any other way that that wasn't possible. Today, I bring you another exclusive interview with a second whistleblower whose identity we are also concealing. This time giving concerning testimony which claims that there were far too many hurdles for workers that did manage to try and vote early to do so, and that some of the men who advocated for fair voting access were punished for doing so.
We even brought it up with Elections Canada if we can get something set up there in camp so they'll read their vote. And they said they were working on it or looking into it, but it was already too late. And I don't think they had enough time to set anything up because nothing was being done here on site.
Not everyone understands the ins and outs of election rules, especially when it comes to what special exceptions are made for remote and industrial site workers, which is why when I received voting access complaints from tradesmen working at the LNG site, which to date has seen over 30,000 workers, the majority of which are contracted and subcontracted from out of town, I got their concerns out to you, the public, as soon as I could. But unfortunately, even that was too late to have any impact on what could be done for many of these tradesmen who say they were unable to vote. The tradesmen I previously spoke with claimed that only after asking management when and how to vote, that they were told they could find their way into town and vote on their free time if they had any, or not to worry. If not, they would be transported by buses out to vote on voting day. In reality, in accordance with the Elections Act, only locals would be able to vote on voting day. Well, I've spoken to even more tradesmen now, and today I bring you a concerning interview with a second whistleblower whose identity we are also protecting. This worker sheds light on how many hurdles there were, allegedly, for workers who did decide to try and vote early, like himself, after catching wind that they needed to do so, or they just wanted to do it early.
Yeah, we were asking since the 16th about what the voting information is. Nobody was getting back to us, so had a few co-workers asking me about information regarding voting. And so I took it upon myself. I called Elections Canada to find out where we could vote. And then we were told that we can vote in Kitimat at the city's 330 city center. And then I brought that up, and then we were told we weren't allowed to vote. Only locals are allowed to vote. And then now with that call that went to Canada, they said, no, you were behind. No, I don't give you at least 3 hours paid plus transportation. I talked to Elections Canada, and they told we were allowed to vote in Kitimat there, and then they came back and they told us we weren't allowed to go, but only locals were allowed to vote. And then I called Elections Canada again, and then they told me that they have to give us at least 3 hours paid time to go vote plus transportation. So I set that off again to upper management, trying to figure out what's going on there. And then they came back and said you are allowed to vote, but you have to do it on your own time. So then I called Elections Canada again, and they said they were looking into it. And then it wasn't until about Monday when we got the information from our supervisors that we are allowed to vote, but nobody is getting transportation. So then I got a hold of Elections Canada again to confirm, and then they said that they were in back and forth conversations with LNG, JFJV, and other companies have determined that we didn't have to get transportation because we were off work at least 3 hours before the polls close. But all the locals in Kitimat, and Terrace who get off work with ample time to vote and they have their own vehicles, all got transportation from site on. The site's diving. Like they 3 hours and transported in the town via bus to go vote. And not 90% of the workforce is all out of province. So they weren't giving transportation to 90% of the workforce, only catering through the locals.
You'll hear more from him in a minute, but does that make sense to you? Granted, it's only employers, not contractors, that the Election Act requires to give their workers at least 3 hours off with pay to vote, but this isn't fast food workers or caterers. These are tradesmen, often out in the middle of nowhere and sometimes literally in the dark and working for many days in a row. So why would site management only make arrangements for locals who have their own vehicles and likely have family, friends nearby with vehicles in case they don't, when the vast majority of their workers were from out of town? And before you start saying, well, even if some of the workers found out last second that they needed to vote early or others clued in some other way, they still could and should have. Listen to whistleblower number 2 explain why he believes that hundreds of them were unable to.
I just found out the information. I didn't cause a ruckus or anything. I just wanted to get something said or written down to clarify exactly what's actually happening. And when I had that happen to me, a group of us all kind of got disciplined. So now we're parting ways and going to work somewhere else. Wow. Things they say what happened. They weren't telling us any information. We kept asking. And it wasn't until like the day before voting for locals was done. Like we only had till 6 p.m. previous Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And they told us on the Monday. I think that was the 22nd, Tuesday, 22nd, I think the date was. And they told us on the 21st that we won't be getting any transportation. So a lot of people have to try to get in the towns through their own way, cab, hitchhike or walk. They didn't to go vote. And there were probably 1,000 people that didn't make it in to go vote because there was no transportation. And there was already right. And there were between 4 to 6 taxis. And you can't fit thousands of people in 4 to 6 cabs. Because a couple days ago, it was brought up that some people who just flew into work wanted to go vote, and they were asking it. They said they already missed it. So there was only a few people trying to actually find the proper information because the companies and the job site weren't saying anything. And it wasn't until Elections Canada was notified that people had actually got some information. They were, I think, personally withholding information because they didn't want people to vote. Because why? Understanding.
Was someone in charge directly suppressing how to vote? And tradesmen who did realize there was an issue with workers' ability to vote getting punished for advocating to fix the issue? I already shared with you JGC Floor's initial response to my first inquiry on this matter. A communications director, Lori Jansen, claimed that voting information was issued to the project workforce and that bulletins with voting information were also issued and that it was stated that only locals would be transported on voting day. Whistleblower number 2's response to such claims is just like whistleblower number 1's. They say none of that information properly or effectively reached the people.
So the bulletins was only posted in the lobby in CVL, Cedar Valley Lodge, the count. I called the front desk asking if they knew anything about votings, and they said it's posted on the bulletin board. So I went and looked at the bulletin board and had a bus schedule owner that said locals only, and then called this number to find out where you could vote. So I called that number, and that's where I found out that you could vote in downtown Kitimat. And then I got a hold of my supervision, and they weren't sending out any information. They didn't even have the bulletin printed off. They didn't pass out that bulletin until Sunday, the 20th. Well, and it took about a week for them to tell us anything after asking for a week. They said that they put out information, but there was no email, there was no bulletins on site, there was just one piece of paper on a bulletin board in camp that nobody knew about.
I followed up with JGC to see if something was amiss here. Did they in fact distribute this information effectively, and if so, how and why have so many missed it? And why on earth are some tradesmen claiming to have been disciplined for advocating for more fair and transparent voting access? But unlike with my first inquiry, poof, I've been ghosted, which means you have too. It means you're not getting the answers either. I did, however, receive a tip with what appears to be an internal email sent by upper management. The email details how shift workers needed to vote, including that out-of-towners needed to vote early and that they would not be bussed to do so on voting day. But, consistent with what both whistleblower statements said, this email wasn't even sent out till April 20th, which is 2 days prior to the early voting deadline, and is after some tradesmen frustrated with the lack of information, lack of answers. Well, it's after they already started pressing management and Elections Canada for information. And not only did all of the tradesmen I've shown this email to inform me that they never saw it, they never received it, and they never got that information from management, they also pointed out that none of the email addresses, which we've blacked out for privacy reasons, are to the different companies that are subcontracted under floor to bring workers on the site. And what stood out to me further is that even after it appears Floor is aware that some of their workers, maybe many, are frustrated or concerned about a lack of communication and access to vote, Floor doesn't even tell the management they did email to ensure that they get this vital and timely information out to all working under them. Instead, they say to give the information to the workers that come asking for it. But why would those who claim they were told they would be bussed out on voting day to vote come and ask information again? And is it reasonable to expect the majority of your out-of-town workers to manage to find enough time to ask floor management about this, which you've only sent to them, by the way, a day and a half prior to the deadline? And I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but I didn't hear back here. If they don't have a car, they can't get a taxi, walking there and back is also not a fair option because, well, not just because they were expected to do it within 3 hours of their fair time, but because it's not safe due to wildlife risks and a lack of a sidewalk on the route. Why didn't management just arrange for a special ballot kiosk to have come to the workers on site instead of going through all of these barriers?
We even brought it up with Elections Canada if we can get something set up there in camp so they'll read their food. And they said they were working on it or looking into it, but it was already too late. And I don't think they had enough time to set anything up because nothing was being done here on site.
Naturally, I also reached out to Elections Canada as well to see what they had done. Did they try to assist management in creating a workspace opportunity for them to reasonably vote? I was told that Elections Canada had multiple communications with the site administration, which clearly explained the options for voting, including that they could have a special ballot kiosk voting option. Elections Canada also made it clear that they are not permitted to physically go onto the site or distribute any information on site without permission. So, what do you think? Based on this information, it appears mass voter suppression did in fact take place on this site. But many questions still remain. Which party was most impacted, if so? And was this suppression intentional or not? Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. I think this is a pretty important story, do you? But not a peep from the mainstream state-backed media. If you appreciate the reports that Rebel News brings you, especially on important matters like election, please go to campaign2025.com and donate what you can for the costs to bring you such reports.